At 3:17 in the morning, a 7-year-old boy handed his mother a letter that would destroy everything she thought she knew about her life. 5 words, written in crayon, by a child who had seen something he was never supposed to see. What happened next?
I'm truly sorry it's come to this.
Her husband didn't apologize. He didn't confess.
You need to tell the detective everything
Instead,
you know.
he did something so calculated.
There it is, the proof we needed.
So cruel that it makes my blood run cold just thinking about it. He had her
He
committed
played
to
us
a
both for
psychiatric
fools.
facility.
We have to stop him.
He took her son.
The perfect crime,
He convinced
darling.
everyone she was crazy. And that wasn't even the worst part.
Mr. Dawson,
Because while she was locked away, he was building a trap that would send her to federal prison for crimes she never committed.
Me too, the pizza smells
$2 million.
amazing. Come
Offshore
and get it, you
accounts.
two.
Her name on every document. She had 48 hours to prove her innocence, and only one weapon left. The truth. This is Claire's story, and I promise you, you will never see the ending coming. The fluorescent lights in the police interrogation room buzzed with a steady, merciless hum that seemed designed to break a person's spirit. Claire Dawson sat alone at the cold metal table, her hands trembling so badly she had to press them flat against the surface just to keep them still. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like dark rivers of exhaustion and fear. She had been sitting in this room for nearly 2 hours, and every minute felt like an eternity. The door swung open with a heavy click. Detective Angela Martinez walked in, her expression unreadable as she carried a manila folder thick with documents. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that had seen too many lies to be fooled by anyone. She sat down across from Claire and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Dawson," the detective began, her voice calm but firm, "I appreciate you waiting. I know this has been a difficult day." Claire let out a hollow laugh that sounded more like a sob. A difficult day. That was quite the understatement. 3 weeks ago, she had been a stay-at-home mother living in a beautiful Connecticut home with her husband and 7-year-old son. Now she was sitting in a police station, facing accusations that could send her to federal prison for the next 20 years. Detective Martinez opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. Claire looked down and felt her stomach drop. It was a picture of a black Mercedes sedan, half submerged in murky water. Miller's Creek. She recognized the location from countless family drives through the countryside. "Can you explain," Detective Martinez said slowly, "why your husband's car was found at the bottom of Miller's Creek with $2 million in cash in the trunk?" Claire stared at the photograph. Her mind raced through everything that had happened, every lie she had been told, every trap she had walked into without even knowing it. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can explain everything, but you need to understand, Detective. It started with a letter from my son." Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair and folded her arms across her chest. She had heard a lot of opening lines in her career, but this one caught her attention. "Go on," she said. Claire took a deep breath. "Where do I begin?" The detective's expression softened just slightly. "Start at the beginning, Mrs. Dawson. We have all night." Claire closed her eyes and let herself drift back to a morning that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. 3 weeks earlier, everything had seemed normal, or at least what she had convinced herself was normal. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of crisp autumn day that made Connecticut look like a postcard, all golden leaves and blue skies and the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from neighborhood chimneys. Claire had been in the kitchen of their 4-bedroom colonial home, packing lunch for her son Noah while simultaneously reviewing his spelling words and mentally planning dinner. Noah sat at the breakfast table, his small legs swinging as he worked through a bowl of cereal. He was 7 years old, with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful eyes. He was the kind of child who noticed things, who asked questions that adults often did not want to answer. Marcus Dawson, Claire's husband, sat at the other end of the table, his attention completely absorbed by his phone. He was 39 years old, handsome in that polished way that successful men often cultivated, with a jaw that seemed designed for confidence and eyes that could charm anyone in a boardroom. He was the vice president of operations at a major pharmaceutical company, a position he had worked toward for over a decade. "Marcus," Claire said gently, "Noah has a spelling test today. Maybe you could quiz him while I finish his lunch?" Marcus did not look up from his phone. "Can't. I have a conference call in 20 minutes. "It's only 5 words," Claire pressed. "It would mean a lot to him." Marcus finally glanced up, his expression flickering with irritation before smoothing into something more neutral. Claire, I said I can't. Some of us have actual responsibilities. The words stung more than they should have. After 7 years of marriage, Claire had learned to absorb these small cuts, to file them away in a mental folder she tried not to open too often. She had given up her nursing career when Noah was born because Marcus had suggested it would be better for everyone. At the time, it had seemed like a loving gesture. Now, 7 years later, she was beginning to understand it differently. "It's okay, Mom," Noah said quietly. "I know all the words anyway." Claire smiled at her son, though something in her chest ached. "Of course you do, sweetheart. You're brilliant." Marcus stood abruptly, grabbing his briefcase and checking his watch. "I'll be late tonight. Meeting with the board." "Again?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Is that a problem?" "No, no, of course not. I just thought maybe we could have dinner together as a family for once." "For once," Marcus repeated, his tone sharpening. "You make it sound like I never spend time with you. I work 60 hours a week to pay for this house, Claire. For Noah's school, for everything you enjoy. A little gratitude wouldn't kill you." He walked out before she could respond, the front door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the quiet house. Claire stood frozen at the kitchen counter, her hands still holding Noah's lunchbox. She had become so accustomed to these moments that she almost did not feel them anymore. Almost. "Mom?" Noah's voice broke through her thoughts. "Why does Dad always seem mad?" Claire forced another smile, kneeling down to meet her son's eyes. "He's not mad, sweetheart. He's just stressed from work. Grown-up stuff." Noah considered this for a moment, then said something that Claire would remember for the rest of her life. "Stressed people don't lie, Mom. Stressed people just look tired. Dad looks like he's hiding something." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, Noah?" But the school bus honked outside before Noah could answer, and the moment was lost in the rush of backpacks and goodbye kisses and promises to have a good day. Claire watched her son climb onto the bus, waving until it disappeared around the corner, and tried to convince herself that everything was fine. But deep down, in a place she had been ignoring for far too long, she knew that nothing was fine at all. The day passed the way most of Claire's days passed, in a blur of household tasks that left her exhausted but with nothing tangible to show for her efforts. She cleaned bathrooms that would be dirty again by tomorrow. She did laundry that seemed to reproduce in the hamper. She paid bills using the joint account that Marcus controlled, always careful not to spend too much, always aware that he reviewed every transaction. By 9 o'clock that evening, Noah was in bed and Marcus still had not come home. Claire sat alone in the living room, the television playing some reality show she was not really watching. Her phone dark on the cushion beside her. Marcus had texted once around 6 to say the meeting was running late. She had replied with a simple okay and received nothing in response. At 11:30, she finally gave up waiting and went to bed, but sleep would not come. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of Marcus's car in the driveway. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like something essential had been removed from it without her permission. Just after midnight, a soft sound from the hallway made her sit up. Footsteps, small ones. Claire slipped out of bed and opened the bedroom door to find Noah standing there in his dinosaur pajamas, his face streaked with tears. "Noah? What's wrong, sweetheart?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he held out a folded piece of paper, his small hands shaking. Claire knelt down and took the paper gently, unfolding it to reveal a letter written in crayon, the handwriting uneven and childlike, but the words devastatingly clear. "Read it, Mom," Noah whispered. "I wrote it for Dad, but I think you need to see it first." Claire's heart began to pound as she read the words her 7-year-old son had written. "Dear Daddy, I saw you kissing a lady who isn't Mommy. She had yellow hair and a red car. You told me to keep secrets, but this secret hurts my tummy. Mommy cries in the bathroom when you're not home. I hear her. If you keep making Mommy cry, I don't want to be your son anymore. I'm sorry if this is bad, but I can't hold it inside. Love, Noah." Claire's vision blurred. She read the letter again, then a third time, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. When she finally looked up at her son, she saw wisdom in his eyes that no child should have to carry. "When did you see this, Noah?" she asked, her voice barely functioning. Last Saturday, you said you had a headache, and I went to find Dad in the garage. But he wasn't there. I looked out the window and saw him in a red car with a lady. They were kissing, like in the movies. Claire pulled Noah into her arms and held him tight, not trusting herself to speak. Her mind was racing through every Saturday, every late meeting, every business trip. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she swallowed without question? Are you mad at me? Noah asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. No, baby, never. You did nothing wrong. You were so brave to tell me. Is Dad going to be in trouble? Claire hesitated. The truth was too complicated for a 7-year-old, too complicated even for her to fully process in this moment. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you, everything is going to be okay. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But sometimes lies were the only kindness available. She put Noah back to bed, staying with him until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then she went downstairs to wait for her husband, the letter clutched in her hand like evidence at a crime scene. Because that was exactly what it was. Marcus finally came home at 3:17 in the morning. Claire heard his key in the lock, heard him slip off his shoes in the foyer, heard him pause when he saw the kitchen light still on. When he walked in and saw her sitting at the table, something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? She could not tell anymore. Claire, why, you're still up. She did not respond. She simply slid the letter across the table toward him. Marcus picked it up, his expression shifting as he read. When he finished, he set it down carefully, as if it might explode. Where did you get this? Noah wrote it. He saw you, Marcus. He saw you kissing another woman in a red car. Marcus laughed, but it was not a genuine laugh. It was the sound of someone buying time. Claire, you can't be serious. Noah is 7 years old. He doesn't know what he saw. He knows enough to describe her blonde hair and her red Porsche. He knows enough to connect your late nights with my crying. You've been crying? Marcus's voice shifted to concern, but it felt rehearsed. Claire, if you're struggling with depression again, we should talk to your doctor. The pivot was so smooth, so practiced, that Claire almost missed it. Almost. Don't do that, she said quietly. Don't make this about my mental health. This is about your affair. I am not having an affair. Marcus's voice hardened. I don't know what Noah thinks he saw, but he's a child with an overactive imagination. You're going to trust a 7-year-old over your own husband? Claire stared at him, searching for some trace of the man she had married. She found nothing. Then explain the perfume, she said. Explain why you smell like someone else's perfume at 3 in the morning. Marcus's jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated in my own home. We'll talk about this when you've calmed down. He walked past her toward the stairs, and Claire felt something inside her finally crack. All the years of swallowed words, suppressed doubts, and manufactured smiles collapsed into a single moment of clarity. She was done pretending. But she also knew that confronting Marcus directly would get her nowhere. He was too skilled at deflection, too practiced at making her doubt her own perceptions. If she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. And she had a very good idea of where to start looking. The next morning, Marcus acted as if nothing had happened. He came downstairs in his perfectly pressed suit, kissed Claire on the cheek, ruffled Noah's hair, and left for work with a cheerful promise to be home for dinner. It was such a flawless performance that Claire almost wondered if she had dreamed the entire confrontation. But she had not dreamed it, and she was done being gaslit. After dropping Noah at school, Claire drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town and called her best friend, Rachel Sullivan. Rachel was a 38-year-old divorced mother of 2 who worked as a paralegal at a family law firm. She had been through her own marital nightmare 5 years earlier, and she had emerged from it with a vocabulary of legal terms and a zero-tolerance policy for cheating husbands. Rachel arrived within 20 minutes, sliding into the booth across from Claire with a large coffee and an expression of grim solidarity. She listened without interrupting as Claire told her everything, from Noah's letter to Marcus's gaslighting, to the sick feeling in her stomach that had been growing for months. When Claire finished, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Claire's hands in hers. First of all, she said firmly, you are not crazy, and Noah is not imagining things. 7-year-olds do not make up affairs with specific details like blonde hair and red Porsches. I know, Claire whispered. I know. But what do I do? Rachel's expression sharpened into something almost predatory. You do exactly what I did when I caught my ex. You document everything. You protect yourself financially. And you do not, under any circumstances, let him know what you're planning until you're ready to strike. She pulled out her phone and opened a notes app. Okay, here's your checklist. First, screenshots. If you can get into his phone, copy everything. Texts, emails, photos, call logs. Second, bank statements. Find out where the money's going. Third, open a bank account in your name only and start putting cash aside. Fourth, find a lawyer, a good one. Not some strip mall ambulance chaser, but someone who specializes in high-asset divorces. Claire's head was spinning. This is all happening so fast. Rachel squeezed her hands. I know it feels that way, but trust me, Claire. Men like Marcus don't just wake up one day and decide to cheat. He's been planning this for a while. You need to catch up. Claire nodded slowly. The fear was still there, coiling in her stomach like a snake. But something else was emerging alongside it. Determination. For 7 years, she had trusted Marcus to protect her and their son. Now she understood that the only person who could protect them was herself. There's one more thing, Rachel said carefully, and you're not going to like it. What? Don't confront him again. Not yet. Let him think you've accepted his explanation. Let him get comfortable. The more relaxed he is, the sloppier he'll get, and the easier it will be to catch him. It went against every instinct Claire had. She wanted to scream at Marcus, to demand answers, to make him face the destruction he had caused. But Rachel was right. Emotion would only give him more ammunition to use against her. Okay, Claire said finally. I'll play along. For now. Rachel smiled, but there was steel beneath it. Good girl. Now let's go open that bank account. Over the next 72 hours, Claire became someone she barely recognized. By day, she was the same devoted wife and mother she had always been, cooking dinner, helping with homework, asking Marcus about his day with a smile that felt like wearing a mask. By night, after everyone was asleep, she became an investigator. Marcus had a backup tablet that he used occasionally for work presentations. He had forgotten, or perhaps never realized, that his iMessages synced to it automatically. Claire found the tablet in his home office, buried under old magazines, and what she discovered made her physically sick. Dozens of messages with someone saved as J with a heart emoji, explicit photographs, plans for hotel meetings. I love you and I can't wait until we can be together for real. And she has no idea, does she? The dates went back almost 2 years, 2 years of lies. 2 years of Claire believing that the distance in her marriage was her fault, that she needed to try harder, be better, love more. 2 years of Marcus looking her in the eyes and making her doubt her own sanity. She screenshot everything. Then she put the tablet back exactly where she found it and went to the bathroom to vomit. The next day, she drove to Hartford and opened a bank account in her maiden name. She withdrew $15,000 from the household safe, exactly half of what was there, and deposited it into her new account. That night, she met with a divorce lawyer for a free consultation and learned that Connecticut was an equitable distribution state, which meant assets would be divided fairly but not necessarily equally. You have a strong case, the lawyer told her. Documented infidelity, financial control, potential emotional abuse. But you need to be strategic. If he finds out you're planning to leave before you're ready, he could move assets, file first, or try to paint you as the unstable one. Claire remembered Marcus's comment about her depression, about medication, and felt cold all over. He's already laying that groundwork, she said. The lawyer nodded grimly. Then we need to move carefully. I'll start preparing paperwork. In the meantime, keep documenting. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're on to him. Claire drove home feeling, for the first time in years, like she had some control over her own life. She had evidence. She had money. She had a plan. In a few weeks, maybe a month, she would be ready to file for divorce and take her son somewhere safe. She never got the chance. When she walked through the front door that evening, Marcus was standing in the living room. He was not alone. A police officer stood beside him, notebook in hand, and both men turned to look at Claire with expressions that made her blood freeze. Officer, Marcus said, his voice heavy with false concern, this is my wife. As I explained, she's been experiencing a mental health crisis. She withdrew $15,000 from our family safe today, and I'm concerned she may be a danger to herself or our son. The officer looked at Claire with what he probably thought was compassion, but felt like accusation. Mrs. Dawson, is there somewhere we can talk? Claire opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain everything, but Marcus spoke first. Honey, I found the bank account. I know you've been hiding things. His voice was so gentle, so worried. I think we need to get you some help. And in that moment, Claire understood with terrible clarity that Marcus had known exactly what she was doing all along. He had been watching her. He had been waiting for her to make a move so he could use it against her. The trap had been set, and she had walked right into it. The next 3 days shattered everything Claire thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and the system that was supposed to protect people like her. It began with what Marcus called a wellness check. The police officer, trained to recognize signs of mental distress, saw a woman whose husband expressed deep concern about her erratic financial behavior, her history of depression, and her increasingly paranoid accusations about an affair that clearly did not exist. He saw a woman who was trembling and pale and struggling to form coherent sentences. He did not see a woman who had just discovered 2 years of betrayal and was being masterfully gaslit by a man who had practiced this manipulation for their entire marriage. Marcus suggested, with tears in his eyes, that Claire might benefit from a brief psychiatric evaluation, just to make sure she was okay, just to rule out any serious issues. The officer agreed that this seemed reasonable, given the circumstances. Claire tried to protest, tried to explain, but her words came out jumbled and desperate, which only confirmed what Marcus had already planted in everyone's minds. She was taken to a psychiatric facility 40 minutes from their home. The 72-hour hold was presented as voluntary, but when Claire tried to leave, she discovered that voluntary had limits. She was told she was experiencing an acute stress reaction. She was given medication that made her thoughts feel like they were swimming through molasses. She was not allowed to use her phone. On the second day, a social worker came to speak with her. Claire tried to explain about Marcus, about the affair, about the evidence on his tablet. The social worker nodded sympathetically and made notes and said things like, "It sounds like you've been under a lot of stress, and sometimes our minds create narratives to help us cope with difficult feelings." By the third day, Claire had learned to stop talking. She answered questions with short, calm responses. She agreed that she had been under a lot of stress lately. She did not mention the affair or the evidence or the bank account. She played the game because she understood now that the game was all that mattered. When she was finally released, Marcus was waiting in the lobby with flowers, an expression of profound relief. "Claire," he said, pulling her into a hug that felt like a cage. "I was so worried about you. But it's okay now. You're going to be okay." She let him hold her. She let him lead her to the car. She let him talk the entire drive home about how they would get through this together, how he had already scheduled an appointment with her old psychiatrist, how he had taken a few days off work to be there for her. When they pulled into the driveway, Claire saw Rachel's car parked on the street. Her heart lifted for just a moment before Marcus spoke again. "I asked Rachel to give us some space for a while," he said casually. "Just until you're feeling more stable. I hope you understand." Claire felt the last threads of hope begin to fray. Inside the house, everything looked different. Cleaner, somehow. More organized. Claire walked through the rooms like a stranger, looking for something she could not name, until she reached Noah's bedroom and found it empty. Not empty of furniture, empty of Noah. "Where is he?" Claire's voice came out as a whisper. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind her. "He's with my mother, just for a few days. She thought it would be good for him to have some stability while you recover." "I want to see him." "Of course you do." Marcus's voice was soothing, reasonable. "And you will, as soon as we get you stabilized. The doctor said too much stimulation could trigger another episode." Claire turned to face her husband. For the first time since the facility, she felt something other than numbness. It was rage, pure and clean, burning through the medication fog like sunlight through clouds. "What did you do, Marcus?" His expression flickered. Just for a second, just long enough for Claire to see something dark behind his careful facade. Then the mask was back. "I did what any loving husband would do. I protected my family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. Claire recognized the logo on the corner. Hartford Family Court. While you were getting the help you needed, Marcus continued, I filed for emergency custody. Given your mental health history and your recent erratic behavior, the judge agreed that Noah should remain with me until a proper evaluation can be conducted. Claire could not breathe, could not think, could not believe what she was hearing. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. I didn't want to do this, Claire, but you forced my hand. If you had just accepted that Noah made a mistake, if you had just trusted me, none of this would have happened. He left the room. Claire heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him on the phone with someone, heard his voice shift into cheerful mode as he made plans for dinner with the colleagues. The performance continued, seamless and terrifying. Claire walked to the window and looked out at the street where she had lived for 7 years. The neighbors were coming home from work, their cars pulling into driveways, their lights flickering on as evening settled over the neighborhood. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. But inside this house, Claire's entire world had just been destroyed. And the worst part was, nobody except Marcus and Claire knew the truth. She had been outmaneuvered, outplanned, outthought, but she had not been defeated. Not yet. Claire pulled out the burner phone Rachel had given her months ago, hidden in a tampon box that Marcus would never think to check. She typed a single message. He took everything. Noah is gone. I need help. Rachel's response came back within seconds. On my way. Don't do anything. Don't say anything. We're not done fighting. For the first time since the facility, Claire felt tears streaming down her face. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of something that felt dangerously like hope. The morning sun had barely crept over the Connecticut hills when Rachel Sullivan's silver Honda pulled into Claire's driveway with the kind of aggressive parking that suggested she was not in the mood for anyone's nonsense. Behind her came a sleek black Mercedes, the kind of car that costs more than most people's annual salary. Claire watched from the window, her heart pounding. She had spent the night curled up in the guest bedroom, unable to sleep in the bed she had shared with the Marcus for 7 years. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. The psychiatric hold had left her shaky, medicated, in questioning her own perceptions in ways that terrified her. But Rachel was here now. Rachel, who had survived her own divorce nightmare. Rachel, who had texted back immediately when Claire reached out on the burner phone. Rachel, who never once asked if Claire was sure about what she had seen or felt. The doorbell rang, then rang again. Then someone started knocking with the kind of insistence that suggested they would not be going away. Claire heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs, heard him muttering something under his breath about boundaries and inappropriate timing. She crept to the top of the staircase and listened. Can I help you? Marcus's voice was cold, controlled, the voice he used when he wanted to intimidate without appearing aggressive. Rachel's response cut through the morning air like a blade. We're here to see Claire. You can either let us in, or you can explain to your neighbors why you're preventing your wife from having visitors 2 days after she was released from a psychiatric facility you put her in. Silence. Claire could imagine Marcus's face, the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of public perception against private control. The door opened wider. Fine, but she's resting. She needs peace and quiet, not whatever this is. What this is, said an unfamiliar voice, cool and professional, is a legal consultation. I'm Catherine Pierce, I'm an attorney, and I suggest you step aside before I start documenting everything about this encounter for the court record I'm already building. Claire descended the stairs, her legs unsteady, but her resolve hardening with each step. When she reached the foyer, she saw Rachel holding a box of pastries and a thermos of coffee, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained fury. Behind her stood a woman Claire had never seen before. Catherine Pierce was somewhere in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Claire's entire wardrobe, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had dismantled powerful men before and would happily do it again. Claire, Rachel said softly, stepping forward to embrace her. I'm so sorry it took me this long to get here. He told everyone you needed space. He told everyone you were fragile. I know, Claire whispered. He's been telling everyone a lot of things. Marcus stood rigid by the door, his jaw tight. Claire, I really think you should rest. These people showing up unannounced is exactly the kind of stress that triggered your episode. Catherine Pierce turned to face him, and something in her expression made Marcus actually take a step backward. "Mr. Dawson," she said pleasantly, "I've been practicing family law for 23 years. I've represented victims of domestic abuse, financial manipulation, and what we in the legal profession call coercive control. Would you like to know how many of those cases started with a husband convincing everyone that his wife was mentally unstable?" Marcus's face flushed. "I don't know what Claire has told you, but she's been under a lot of stress lately. She's not thinking clearly." "Interesting," Catherine said. "That's almost word for word what my last client's husband said. He's currently serving 18 months for fraud and paying her $4 million in damages." She smiled, showing teeth. "I'm very good at my job, Mr. Dawson." Rachel guided Claire toward the kitchen, away from Marcus's toxic presence. Catherine followed, pausing only to add, "We'll be having a private conversation now. I suggest you find somewhere else to be for the next few hours. And Mr. Dawson, don't even think about listening at doors. I have a device that detects recording equipment, and I'm not afraid to use it." They settled at the kitchen table, Rachel pouring coffee while Catherine pulled out a legal pad and a pen that probably cost more than Claire's wedding ring. The morning light streamed through the windows, incongruously cheerful for a conversation that would determine the rest of Claire's life. "Start from the beginning," Catherine said. "Don't leave anything out. Don't minimize anything. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Just tell me the truth." So Claire did. She talked for nearly 2 hours, her voice growing hoarse as she laid out 7 years of small manipulations, financial control, and systematic isolation. She told Catherine about the way Marcus had convinced her to give up nursing, about the joint accounts she had no real access to, about the friends who had slowly drifted away because Marcus always found reasons why they were bad influences, about the way he made her doubt her own memories, her own perceptions, her own sanity. She told her about Noah's letter, about the confrontation, about the way Marcus had twisted everything to make her look unstable while he walked away looking like a concerned husband. By the time she finished, Rachel was crying quietly. Catherine was not. Catherine was taking notes with the focused intensity of a surgeon planning an operation. When Claire finally fell silent, Catherine set down her pen and looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "you are not crazy. You are not unstable. You are the victim of a sophisticated, long-term campaign of psychological manipulation by a man who is very, very good at hiding what he really is. But here's the thing about men like your husband." She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "They always make mistakes. They always leave trails. And they always underestimate the women they have been controlling." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "What do I do?" Catherine's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "First, we challenged the emergency custody order. It was granted under false pretenses, and we have 48 hours to file an appeal. Second, we document everything, every text, every email, every financial transaction, every witness who might have seen something. Third, we find out where the money is going, because men like Marcus don't just lie for fun, they lie for profit." Rachel leaned forward. "What about the mistress? She has to know something if they've been together for 2 years. Claire's stomach churned at the thought, but Catherine nodded approvingly. "Excellent thinking. Mistresses are gold mines of information. They hear the pillow talk, the bragging, the complaints about the wife. And here's the beautiful thing about affairs." She paused for effect. "The other woman almost always thinks she's special. She thinks she's the exception. She thinks he's gonna leave his wife for her. When she finds out she's just another pawn in his game, that's when she becomes our best weapon." "You think Jessica doesn't know what Marcus really is?" Claire asked. Catherine shrugged. "She might suspect, but I guarantee she doesn't know the full picture. Men like Marcus compartmentalize. They tell each woman a different version of the story. Your job is to show her the version he's been hiding. How do I even approach her? I can't just walk up to my husband's mistress and ask for help." Rachel spoke up. "Actually, that's exactly what you should do. Think about it. She's expecting you to be angry, hysterical, the crazy wife Marcus has been describing. What if instead you show up calm, collected, and armed with facts? What if you treat her like a fellow victim instead of an enemy? Claire considered this. It went against every instinct she had, every hurt feeling, every moment of rage she had suppressed for weeks. But it also made a terrible kind of sense. Fine, she said finally, I'll do it. But I'm going to need help finding her. Catherine pulled out her phone. I have an investigator on retainer. Give me everything Noah told you about her appearance and her car. We'll have a name and address by tonight. And that was how, 3 days later, Claire found herself walking into a coffee shop in downtown Hartford to confront the woman who had been sleeping with her husband. Jessica Coleman was everything Claire had expected and nothing like she had imagined. She was beautiful, yet in the way that expensive highlights and designer clothes could make anyone beautiful. But up close, Claire could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted to the door every few seconds, the nervous habit of checking her phone like she was waiting for bad news. She looked, Claire realized with a shock, like a woman who was afraid. Claire walked to her table and sat down without asking permission. Jessica's head snapped up, recognition flooding her face, followed quickly by fear, then defiance. You're Claire, she said flatly, and you're Jessica. Claire kept her voice level, almost pleasant. I expected you to throw a drink in my face. Jessica let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. That would feel satisfying for about 3 seconds. Then I'd have to buy another overpriced coffee and explain to everyone why there's a scene. Despite everything, Claire felt something shift inside her. This woman was not a cartoon villain. She was a human being who had made terrible choices, yes, bosses, but who was also clearly suffering the consequences of trusting the wrong man. I'm not here to fight, Claire said. I'm here to talk. And I think once you hear what I have to say, you might want to talk too. For the next hour, Claire laid out the truth. Not just the affair, which Jessica obviously knew about, but everything else. The gaslighting that had started years before Jessica ever entered the picture. The financial control, the isolation from friends and family, the way Marcus had systematically dismantled Claire's sense of self until she questioned her own memories. She told Jessica about Noah's letter and the confrontation that followed, about the psychiatric hold that Marcus had engineered, about the emergency custody that had ripped her son from her arms. She showed Jessica the court documents, the timeline, the evidence of a man who had been planning his wife's destruction for years. With each revelation, Jessica's face changed. The defiance faded. The smugness disappeared. What remained was horror, pure and dawning, as she realized the scope of what she had been part of. He told me your marriage was over, Jessica whispered when Claire finally stopped talking. He said you had agreed to live as roommates until Noah was older. He said you knew about us and didn't care. Claire shook her head. I found out 3 weeks ago, from my 7-year-old son. Jessica's hands were trembling now. There's something you need to know, the psychiatric hold. She swallowed hard. He asked me to make that call. He gave me a script. He told me exactly what to say to trigger an emergency evaluation. He said it was for your own good, that you were genuinely dangerous, that Noah wasn't safe. Claire felt each word like a physical blow. He used you to take my son. Tears spilled down Jessica's cheeks. Oh God. Oh my God, I thought I was helping. I thought I was protecting a child from a mentally ill mother. I didn't know. I swear to you, Claire, I didn't know. And now you do. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything Marcus had done to both of them. Then Jessica reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. I have recordings, she said quietly. Voice memos. I started making them about 6 months ago. Claire stared at her. Why? Because I'm not stupid. Jessica's voice hardened with something that sounded like self-disgust. I always knew deep down that something was off. He was too smooth, too perfect, too good at having an answer for everything. So I started recording our conversations. Insurance, I told myself, just in case. What's on them? Everything. Him bragging about how easy it is to manipulate you. Him admitting to expensing company money for our trips. Him laughing about how everyone believes whatever he tells them. Jessica slid the phone across the table. Take whatever you need. And Claire? She met Claire's eyes woman to woman, survivor to survivor. I have a younger sister. If any man ever did to her what Marcus has done to you, I would want someone to help her burn him to the ground. Claire picked up the phone with trembling hands. She pressed play on the first recording. Marcus's voice filled the space between them, confident and cruel and utterly damning. She has no idea, he was saying, laughter in his voice. She actually thinks she's losing her mind. By the time I'm done, she won't even trust her own memories. Claire stopped the recording. She looked at Jessica. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me, Jessica's voice cracked. I helped him destroy you. I can never make that right. You can help me destroy him back. Claire stood, tucking the phone into her pocket. That's a start. She walked out of the coffee shop into the cold Hartford afternoon, carrying a weapon that could finally fight back against the man who had taken everything from her. The war was not over, but for the first time, Claire Dawson had ammunition. The Hartford family courthouse rose against the November sky like a monument to the worst moments of people's lives. Gray granite walls, cold glass windows, metal detectors that beeped and buzzed as families filed through, each one carrying their own weight of grief and anger and desperate hope. Claire stood outside the main entrance at 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before her hearing was scheduled to begin. Rachel was on her left, solid and unwavering. Catherine Pierce was on her right, reviewing documents with the focus of a general preparing for battle. Somewhere inside that building, a judge would decide whether Claire ever saw her son again. The thought made her want to vomit. How are you feeling? Rachel asked quietly. Claire laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. Terrified, furious, like I might pass out. She took a shaky breath, but also ready to fight for Noah in a way I should have been fighting for myself years ago. Catherine looked up from her papers. Good. Hold on to that feeling. The next few hours are going to be brutal, but I need you to stay calm, stay focused, and trust me. We have the evidence, we have the testimony, we have the truth. All we need is a judge who's willing to see it. They walked inside together. The security line moved slowly, families shuffling forward with the resigned patience of people who had learned that the legal system operated on its own timeline. Claire recognized some of the faces from news stories, custody battles that had become public spectacles. She wondered if her own face would end up on television before this was over. The courtroom was on the third floor, smaller than Claire had expected. Wood-paneled walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, an American flag standing lonely in the corner. It looked less like a place where justice was served and more like a conference room where dreams came to die. Marcus was already there. He sat at the respondent's table with his attorney, a silver-haired man named William Crawford, who had been making wealthy men's problems disappear for decades. Marcus wore a perfectly tailored gray suit and an expression of wounded concern, the loving father forced to take drastic action to protect his child from an unstable mother. He glanced at Claire as she entered, and something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something colder. Contempt. He still thought he was going to win. Claire took her seat at the petitioner's table and forced herself to breathe. In and out, in and out. She could do this. She had survived his manipulation for 7 years. She could survive one more day in a courtroom. The judge entered at exactly 9 o'clock, a woman in her 60s named Honorable Patricia Morrison. She had silver hair pinned back severely and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. She had a reputation for being fair but uncompromising, and Catherine had called her the best possible judge they could have drawn for this case. We are here today, Judge Morrison began, reading from the file in front of her to address the emergency custody petition filed by Mr. Marcus Dawson and the subsequent appeal filed by Mrs. Claire Dawson. She looked up, her gaze moving between the two tables. I have reviewed the initial filings, and I have questions, many questions. Let's begin. Marcus's attorney went first, spinning a narrative that made Claire want to scream. Your Honor, William Crawford said in his smooth, practiced voice, my client is a devoted father who was forced to make an impossible decision. His wife, Mrs. Dawson, has a documented history of mental health issues, including postpartum depression that required medication for several years. Recently, her behavior became increasingly erratic. She withdrew large sums of money without explanation. She made wild accusations about an affair that never happened. She became paranoid, convinced that her husband was conspiring against her. Claire's hands clenched under the table. Catherine placed a steadying hand on her arm. Crawford continued, painting a picture of a loving husband who had no choice but to seek professional help for his troubled wife. He referenced the psychiatric hold as evidence of her instability, not as the weapon Marcus had wielded against her. When he finally finished, Judge Morrison turned to Catherine. "Ms. Pierce, your response?" Catherine stood slowly, deliberately. She walked to the center of the courtroom and faced the judge directly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and calm, "what you've just heard is a carefully constructed lie, and I can prove it." She laid out the evidence like a surgeon exposing a wound. The timeline of Marcus's affair, documented through text messages and financial records. The recordings Jessica had provided. Marcus's own voice bragging about manipulating his wife. The psychiatric hold, initiated by a phone call that Marcus had scripted and coached his mistress to make. She presented testimony from the psychiatrist who had examined Claire after her release, confirming that the hold had been obtained through misrepresentation. She presented financial records showing that Marcus had been systematically hiding money for years. And then she played the recording. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom, as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "She has no idea. She actually thinks she's losing her mind. By the time I'm done, she won't even trust her own memories." Claire watched Marcus's face as his own words damned him. For just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the panic behind his eyes, the calculation, the desperate search for a way to spin this. Then the mask was back, but it was too late. Everyone in the courtroom had seen what was underneath. Judge Morrison's expression had hardened into stone. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "would you like to explain that recording?" Marcus stood, adjusting his tie, with hands that trembled slightly. "Your Honor, that recording was taken out of context. It was a private conversation that my wife's attorney obtained illegally." Catherine cut in smoothly. "The recording was provided voluntarily by Ms. Jessica Coleman, who was in a romantic relationship with Mr. Dawson for over 2 years. Ms. Coleman has submitted a sworn statement and is available to testify if the court requires." Marcus's face went pale. "Your Honor, Jessica is obviously motivated by revenge. She can't be trusted." "Interesting," Judge Morrison said coolly. "A moment ago, she was your devoted girlfriend. Now she's an unreliable witness. Which is it, Mr. Dawson?" Before Marcus could answer, Catherine delivered her final blow. "Your Honor, I have one more witness." She turned toward the courtroom doors. "The defense calls Mrs. Margaret Dawson." The doors opened. An older woman walked in, her posture rigid but her eyes filled with determination. Claire recognized her immediately. "Marcus's mother." Marcus shot to his feet. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Margaret did not look at her son. She walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down with the careful movements of someone who had made a decision that cost her everything. "Mrs. Dawson," Catherine said gently, "thank you for being here. Can you tell the court why you've chosen to testify today?" Margaret's voice trembled, but she did not break. "I'm here because I love my son, but I love my grandson more. And I love the truth most of all." She took a breath. "What Marcus has done to Claire is exactly what his father did to me. Control, manipulation, making me believe I was crazy when I wasn't, making everyone else believe it too." Marcus's attorney objected, calling the testimony prejudicial. Judge Morrison overruled him with a single sharp word. Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "I watched my husband destroy me piece by piece over 15 years. By the time I found the courage to leave, I had nothing. No friends, no money, no self-confidence. I barely recognized myself." She finally turned to look at Marcus, and her eyes were filled with grief and anger and terrible love. "I raised you to be different. I told you stories about what your father did to me. I thought you understood how wrong it was. But you didn't learn from his mistakes, Marcus. You learned his techniques." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "I will not let you do to my grandson what your father did to me," Margaret said. "I will not let another generation be destroyed by this cycle, even if it means losing you forever." She looked at Claire, woman to woman, survivor to survivor. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth." Judge Morrison called a 30-minute recess. When she returned, her expression left no doubt about her decision. "I have reviewed all evidence presented today," she announced. "The emergency custody order granted to Mr. Dawson was obtained through fraud, misrepresentation, and what appears to be a coordinated campaign of psychological manipulation against his wife. The recordings, financial evidence, and testimony paint a disturbing picture of a man who weaponized the legal system against the mother of his child. She turned to face Marcus directly. Mr. Dawson, your conduct is appalling. You used mental health resources as a weapon. You coached witnesses to lie. You attempted to destroy your wife's credibility so thoroughly that she would never be believed again. This court does not look kindly on such behavior. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. His attorney grabbed his arm and yanked him back down. I am granting full temporary custody to Mrs. Claire Dawson, effective immediately. Mr. Dawson is permitted supervised visitation only, 1 hour per week at a facility of Mrs. Dawson's choosing. Furthermore, I am referring all evidence of financial irregularities to the appropriate state and federal authorities for investigation. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. This court is adjourned. For a moment, Claire could not move, could not breathe, could not believe what she had just heard. Then Rachel was hugging her, Catherine was squeezing her hand, and somewhere behind her, a door was opening. Noah. He burst through the door like he had been shot from a cannon, his 7-year-old legs pumping as he ran toward her rim. He hit her so hard she stumbled backward, his arms wrapping around her waist, his face pressing against her stomach. Mom, he sobbed. Mom, I missed you so much. I was so scared. Dad said you were sick, but I knew you weren't. I knew you would come back for me. Claire dropped to her knees and held her son tighter than she had ever held anything in her life. Tears streamed down her face, tears she did not even try to hide. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm never leaving you again. I promise. I promise. I promise. Over Noah's shoulder, she saw Marcus being led out by his attorney. His face was a mask of fury, cold and calculating even in defeat. Their eyes met across the courtroom. This isn't over, his expression said. Yes, it is, hers replied. But even as she held her son, even as victory sang through her veins, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Men like Marcus never accepted defeat. They just changed their strategy. 48 hours after the custody hearing, Claire allowed herself to believe the nightmare was finally over. She and Noah had moved into a rental apartment across town, a modest 2-bedroom place with thin walls and creaky floors that felt like a palace after the prison her marriage had become. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The windows looked out over a small park where children played on swings and shouted with the careless joy of innocence. Noah was adjusting slowly. He still woke up crying some nights, still asked questions about his father that Claire struggled to answer, still flinched sometimes when she raised her voice even slightly. The trauma would take time to heal, but he was safe. He was with her. That was all that mattered. On the second evening, Rachel came over with takeout and wine, the first real celebration any of them had allowed themselves since everything fell apart. I still can't believe Margaret testified against her own son, Rachel said, pouring 2 generous glasses of red. That took serious courage. Claire nodded, thinking about the older woman who had sacrificed her relationship with her only child to tell the truth. I'm going to reach out to her, invite her to see Noah. He shouldn't lose his grandmother because of what his father did. Rachel raised her glass, to Margaret, to Catherine, to Jessica, even though it feels weird to toast the other woman, and most of all to you, Claire, for finally fighting back. They clinked glasses. The wine was cheap but tasted like victory. Claire's phone buzzed, a text from Catherine with an update on the financial investigation, which had expanded to include the FBI. Marcus's company had launched an internal audit. His career was effectively over. I almost feel sorry for him, Claire admitted, surprising herself. Rachel nearly choked on her wine. Excuse me? Claire considered the question, swirling the red liquid in her glass. Not sorry for what's happening to him. He earned every consequence he's getting. But sorry for whatever broke inside him that made him capable of this. His mother talked about his father being the same way. Maybe it's a cycle. Maybe he never had a chance to be different. Rachel set down her glass with a sharp click. Or maybe, she said pointedly, he's just an evil man who made evil choices. Nature versus nurture is a nice philosophical debate, but the women he destroyed still have to pick up the pieces. Some people are just broken, Claire, and they break everyone around them. Before Claire could respond, there was a knock at the door. Both women froze. It was after 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The apartment was in a secure building. The doorman had strict instructions not to let anyone up without calling first. No one except Catherine and a handful of trusted friends even knew this address. Rachel looked at Claire, fear flickering in her eyes. Claire moved quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. Her blood turned to ice. Two men in dark suits stood in the hallway. Their postures were rigid, professional, unmistakably law enforcement. One of them was holding something up toward the peephole. A badge. FBI, one of them announced, his voice muffled through the door. Mrs. Dawson, we have a warrant for your arrest. Time seemed to slow down. Claire heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath, heard Noah's bedroom door creak open, heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears like a war drum. She opened the door. The agent who had spoken was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that betrayed nothing. His partner was shorter, younger, holding a folded document that must have been the warrant. Claire Dawson? The first agent asked. Yes, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The words washed over her like a wave of cold water. She heard herself asking what she was being charged with, heard the agent reciting her rights, heard Rachel screaming that this was a mistake, demanding to call Catherine. She heard Noah's voice, small and terrified, cutting through the chaos. Mommy? Mommy, what's happening? Why are they taking you away? Claire turned to see her son standing in the hallway, his dinosaur pajamas rumpled from sleep, his eyes wide with terror. Everything she had fought for, everything she had won, was crumbling around her in real time. She forced her voice to stay calm even as her heart shattered. Baby, listen to me. Mommy has to go answer some questions. It's a mistake, okay? Just a big misunderstanding. Aunt Rachel's going to stay with you, and I'll be back as soon as I can. I promise. Noah's face crumpled. You promised you wouldn't leave me again. The words hit her harder than any blow Marcus had ever landed. I know, baby. I know. And I meant it. This is different. This isn't like before. She looked at Rachel, desperation in her eyes. Call Catherine. Call her right now. Rachel already had her phone out, dialing with shaking hands. The agents guided Claire out of the apartment, down the elevator, through the lobby where the night doorman watched with white, shocked eyes. A black SUV waited at the curb, its engine running, its windows dark. As they walked her toward the vehicle, one of the agents spoke quietly. Mrs. Dawson, the offshore accounts in your name contain over $2 million that was embezzled from your husband's company. We have records of wire transfers, account openings, and transactions that all trace back to your social security number and your signature. I didn't open any offshore accounts, Claire said, her voice rising. I didn't steal any money. My husband did this. He set me up. The agent's expression did not change. You'll have a chance to explain your side of things. They put her in the back of the SUV. The door closed with a sound like a coffin lid. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Claire watched her apartment building shrink in the rear window. Somewhere up there, her son was crying. Somewhere up there, Rachel was trying to explain the inexplicable. Somewhere up there, the new life she had been building was collapsing into rubble. And somewhere out there, Marcus Dawson was probably smiling, because Claire finally understood the full scope of his revenge. The psychiatric hold, the custody battle, the public accusations of instability. They had never been the endgame. They had been the setup. For months, maybe years, Marcus had been hiding money from his company, millions of dollars siphoned into offshore accounts. And he had done all of it using Claire's identity, her name on the paperwork, her social security number on the accounts, her digital fingerprints on every transaction. When she discovered the affair and threatened to leave, when she started documenting evidence and consulting lawyers, Marcus had activated his contingency plan. The psychiatric hold created a paper trail of mental instability. The accusations of erratic behavior established a motive for financial crimes. The custody battle put her in a position of desperation. And now the FBI had stepped in to complete his masterpiece. Claire was not just being framed, she was being erased. Rebuilt in the public record as a criminal, so that nothing she said about Marcus would ever be believed again. Even if she somehow proved her innocence in the fraud case, the accusation alone would destroy her credibility. Her testimony against Marcus would be worthless. The recording from the restaurant, Jessica's evidence, Margaret's testimony, all of it would be painted as the desperate manipulations of a woman trying to deflect from her own crimes. It was brilliant. It was devastating. And Claire had no idea how to fight it. At the FBI field office, she was processed with brutal efficiency. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings cataloged and sealed in a plastic bag. She was given a phone call, which she used to reach Catherine, who promised to be there within the hour. Then she was placed in an interrogation room to wait. The room was small and windowless, with gray walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, shadowless illumination. It looked like the kind of room where hope came to die. Claire sat alone, staring at her hands, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she had been a stay-at-home mother with a cheating husband and a broken marriage. Now she was facing federal charges that could send her to prison for decades. How had it come to this? The door opened. Claire looked up, expecting another agent, another bureaucrat, another piece of the machine that was grinding her into dust. Instead, she saw a familiar face. Detective Angela Martinez walked in, carrying a file folder and wearing an expression that was impossible to read. She sat down across from Claire and studied her for a long moment without speaking. "We meet again, Mrs. Dawson," she said finally. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect it to be like this." Claire felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Detective Martinez, you investigated Marcus's company. You know what he's capable of." "I know what the evidence suggests," Martinez replied carefully. "And right now, the evidence suggests that you've been systematically embezzling money from your husband's company for the past 3 years." Claire leaned forward, desperation making her voice sharp. "He set me up. He opened those accounts in my name. He made those transfers using my identity. He's been planning this for years, Detective. Everything he did to me, the gaslighting, the psychiatric hold, the custody battle, it was all leading to this moment. This is his endgame." Detective Martinez opened her folder and spread several documents across the table. Account records, wire transfer confirmations, signature cards. "These are your signatures," she said quietly. "They're forgeries. They match your known signature in 17 different characteristics." "He had access to everything," Claire insisted. "My social security number, my driver's license, samples of my signature from a decade of joint tax returns. He could forge anything he wanted." Detective Martinez was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that made Claire's heart stop. "I believe you." Claire stared at her. "What?" I said, "I believe you." Martinez closed the folder. "I've been investigating Marcus Dawson for 6 months. His company started noticing financial irregularities last spring. At first, they thought it was an accounting error. Then they found the offshore accounts. Then they found over $2 million missing. And when they traced the money, every single thread led back to you." "Because he wanted it to," Claire said. "Exactly." Martinez leaned back in her chair. "Here's the thing, Mrs. Dawson. I'm very good at my job. And something about this case has never felt right. The trail was too clean, too obvious. Like someone wanted us to find it." She paused. "Men who commit financial crimes usually try to hide them. But these accounts, these transfers, they might as well have had flashing neon signs pointing to your identity. So you believe Marcus set me up." "I believe it's possible. But believing something and proving it are two very different things. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Without something that directly connects Marcus to those accounts, we don't have a case against him. We only have a case against you." Claire felt the walls closing in. "What do I do?" Detective Martinez studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. "This transfer started 3 years ago," she said. "Long before you discovered the affair. Long before the psychiatric hold. If you can prove that you didn't have access to those accounts, didn't make those transfers, didn't benefit from that money, then we have a case for identity theft and fraud against Marcus instead of you. How do I prove a negative? You don't." Martinez slid the card across the table. "You make him prove a positive. You make him admit what he did." Claire picked up the card. It had Martinez's contact information and handwritten on the back, a single sentence. He thinks he's already won. Use it. Claire looked up at the detective. Why are you helping me? Martinez stood, gathering her folder. Because I've spent 6 months watching your husband manipulate everyone around him. Because I've seen the recordings your lawyer submitted. Because I heard his own mother testify about the kind of man he really is. She headed for the door, then paused. And because I have a daughter, Mrs. Dawson, and I'd like to believe that if any man ever did to her what Marcus did to you, someone would help her destroy him. The door closed behind her. Claire sat alone in the interrogation room, holding a business card that represented her only chance at a survival. Marcus thought he had won. He thought Claire was beaten, broken, buried under evidence she could never refute. He had forgotten one crucial thing. Claire Dawson had survived 7 years of his manipulation. She had survived his gaslighting, his control, his systematic destruction of everything she believed about herself. She had survived him, and survivors knew how to fight dirty. Claire looked at the card one more time. Then she tucked it carefully into her pocket and settled back to wait for Catherine. The war was not over. It was just entering a new phase. And this time Claire was not going to be the victim. She was going to be the weapon. Claire spent 3 weeks preparing for the most important performance of her life. Released on bail thanks to Rachel mortgaging her house, Claire returned to the apartment and began building a case that would either save her or destroy her completely. Catherine worked the legal angles, filing motions and gathering evidence. Detective Martinez worked the financial angles, tracing the money through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Jessica provided recordings and testimony that painted Marcus as exactly the kind of person who would commit this crime. But the key to everything was Marcus himself. He was too smart to leave direct evidence of his involvement. The accounts were in Claire's name. The signatures looked like hers. The digital trail led to her devices, infected with malware that he had installed years ago without her knowledge. To prove her innocence, Claire needed Marcus to confess. And to get him to confess, she needed to make him believe he had already won. It began with a phone call. Marcus, Claire said, her voice carefully calculated to sound broken and defeated. I can't do this anymore. The FBI, the lawyers, the constant fighting, I'm exhausted. On the other end of the line, Marcus was silent for a moment. Then cautiously, what are you saying, Claire? I'm saying I want this to end. All of it. I'll drop the custody case. I'll sign whatever you want. Just make this FBI nightmare go away. She could almost hear him weighing the offer, trying to figure out the angle. How do I know this isn't a trap? Because I have nothing left, Claire whispered, letting real tears creep into her voice. You won, Marcus. You took everything. I just want to see my son without supervision. That's all I have left to want. More silence. Then Marcus spoke, and his voice had shifted into something that almost sounded like sympathy. Maybe we should meet, talk this through in person. Claire's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. Where? How about Giovanni's, where I proposed, for old time's sake? Claire agreed. She hung up the phone and looked at Detective Martinez, who had been listening through headphones connected to the recording equipment. He took the bait, Claire said. The detective nodded grimly. Now comes the hard part. Giovanni's was an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Hartford, the kind of place with white tablecloths and candles and a wine list that required a small loan to navigate. Claire arrived early, her heart racing beneath a calm exterior. She was wearing a wire FBI approved and legally obtained through the ongoing investigation. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking like a man who had already written the final chapter of this story in his favor. He smiled when he saw her, that charming smile that had once made her feel safe and now made her skin crawl. Claire, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. You look tired. I am tired, she replied. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of lawyers. I'm tired of being afraid. Marcus nodded sympathetically. I understand. This has been hard on both of us. He ordered wine for both of them, making a show of choosing something expensive, something celebratory. When the glasses arrived, he raised his in a toast. To new beginnings, he said. Claire clinked her glass against his, but did not drink. To new beginnings. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus talked. He talked about how they could make this work, how he would be reasonable about custody, how they could both move on with their lives. He was charming, reasonable, almost believable. Then Claire played her card. There's just one thing I need to understand, she said quietly. The offshore accounts. The FBI says the transfer started 3 years ago, but I didn't know anything about them until now. How is that possible? Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment. Claire, we don't need to go into details, but I do need to understand, she pressed. If I'm going to sign documents, taking responsibility for this, I need to know what I'm taking responsibility for. Walk me through it. Please, he hesitated. The wine, the setting, Claire's apparent surrender, all of it had made him comfortable. Too comfortable. Fine, he said finally. It was a business strategy. The company had certain, shall we say, flexibility issues. Money that needed to be moved without too many questions. I used your identity because you have a clean financial history. No debts, no suspicious activity. It was perfect. But I didn't know, Claire said carefully. Of course you didn't know. Marcus smiled. That was the whole point. If you didn't know, you couldn't accidentally reveal anything. And if anything ever went wrong, well, I would take the fall. He shrugged. That was always a theoretical scenario, until you started digging into things that weren't your business. Claire felt sick, but she kept her voice steady. So when I found out about Jessica, when I started making plans to leave, you decided to activate your backup plan. I did what I had to do to protect myself. Marcus's voice hardened. You think I was going to let you destroy everything I built? You're a housewife, Claire. I'm a vice president. The world needs people like me. Claire leaned forward. But the money is gone now. $2 million at the bottom of Miller's Creek. White Marcus laughed. Insurance. If the company investigation got too close, if the FBI started connecting dots, I needed a dramatic ending. A desperate wife who stole from her husband's company and then panicked when she got caught. Tried to hide the evidence in a creek. Very tragic. And what was supposed to happen to me in this scenario? Marcus's smile faded. He looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been annoyance. You were supposed to be in prison by now. This dinner wasn't part of the plan. Claire held his gaze. No, she said quietly. It wasn't. She looked past Marcus toward the kitchen entrance. Detective Martinez stepped out, badge visible, followed by 2 FBI agents. Marcus Dawson, Detective Martinez said, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, falsifying financial documents, and filing false police reports. You have the right to remain silent, though I notice that's not your strong suit. Marcus's face went white. He spun toward Claire, understanding flooding his expression. You were wearing a wire. I was. This won't hold up in court. My lawyers will tear this apart. Claire stood slowly, gathering her coat. Maybe, but I don't think so. You just confessed to everything, Marcus. You explained how you set me up, why you did it, and what you planned to do with the money. That's not circumstantial. That's a gift-wrapped case. As the agents handcuffed him, Marcus lunged toward Claire, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure you never see Noah again. Claire did not flinch. She walked toward him slowly, close enough that only he could hear her next words. I already paid Marcus for 7 years. This is my refund. She turned and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind her, she could hear Marcus shouting, threatening, promising revenge. But his voice grew fainter with each step, until finally it disappeared entirely. Outside, the November air was cold and sharp and clean. Claire stood on the sidewalk and took a breath that seemed to fill spaces in her lungs she had forgotten existed. Rachel was waiting by the car, eyes wide. Did it work? Claire smiled. It's over. Rachel pulled her into a hug so tight it almost hurt. You did it? You actually did it. We did it, Claire corrected, all of us together. In the distance, sirens approached. More FBI vehicles, more official proceedings, more of the machinery of justice grinding into motion. But Claire was not thinking about any of that. She was thinking about a small boy in a rented apartment, waiting for his mother to come home, waiting to hear that the monster was finally gone. She got in the car and Rachel drove her toward a future she had almost given up believing was possible. The trial took 4 months. 4 months of testimony, evidence, legal arguments, and media coverage that turned the Dawson case into a nationwide story. The cheating husband, the gaslit wife, the 7-year-old boy whose letter started it all. It had everything the public craved: wealth, betrayal, revenge, redemption. Claire testified for 3 days. She walked the jury through every moment, from Noah's letter to the psychiatric hold to the night she wore a wire and watched her husband destroy himself. The recording from Giovanni's played in the courtroom, Marcus's voice confident and cruel as he explained exactly how he had set up his wife to take the fall for his crimes. Marcus's defense tried everything. They claimed entrapment. They questioned Claire's mental stability. They suggested the recording had been manipulated. They brought in character witnesses who testified to what a good man Marcus Dawson was, how devoted to his family, how respected in his field. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had traced the money through 12 different shell companies across 4 countries, and every single one of them connected back to Marcus. His signatures, his passwords, his devices. The malware on Claire's computer had been installed by someone using Marcus's personal laptop. Jessica Coleman testified about their affair and about Marcus's bragging. Margaret Dawson testified about the pattern of abuse she had recognized from her own marriage. Detective Martinez walked the jury through the financial crimes with devastating precision. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution called one last witness, Noah Dawson. Claire had fought against this for weeks. She did not want her son anywhere near that courtroom, anywhere near his father's rage. But the prosecutor insisted that Noah's testimony was essential, that his words would humanize the case in a way that financial records never could. In the end, Claire relented. Because Noah had asked to testify, he had asked to tell the truth. The courtroom fell silent as the 7-year-old took the stand. He looked impossibly small in the witness chair, his feet not quite touching the floor. But his voice was steady as he answered the prosecutor's questions. Noah, can you tell us about the letter you wrote to your father? Noah nodded. I wrote it because I was scared. I saw Dad kissing a lady who wasn't Mom. He told me it was a secret. But secrets were making my tummy hurt. What happened after you gave the letter to your mother? Everything got bad, Noah said simply. Mom started crying more. Then Dad made Mom go to a hospital. Then Dad took me to Grandma's house and said Mom was sick. But I knew she wasn't sick. She was just sad. Dad made her sad. Marcus's lawyer objected, calling the testimony too emotional and prejudicial. The judge overruled. Noah, the prosecutor continued gently. Do you understand what your father did? Noah's eyes found Marcus across the courtroom. For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. Then Noah spoke, and his words were the most devastating testimony of the entire trial. My dad lied, Noah said. He lied to Mom. He lied to me. He lied to everyone. And when people figured out he was lying, he tried to make Mom look like she was the one who did bad things. But she didn't. He did. He did all of it. He paused, his young face struggling with emotions too complex for his years. I love my dad. I don't want him to go to jail. But I also love my mom. And what he did to her was really, really wrong. So I think he has to have a consequence. Because that's what happens when you do wrong things. You have a consequence. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on 14 counts of fraud, identity theft, falsifying financial documents, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. The judge sentenced Marcus to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay restitution of $4.7 million to his former employer. His assets were frozen. His career was finished. His reputation was ashes. Claire watched the sentencing from the gallery, Noah's hand in hers. She had expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she felt something closer to grief. Grief for the marriage she had believed in. Grief for the father Noah would grow up visiting through prison glass. Grief for the years she had lost to a man who never deserved them. After the judge dismissed the court, Claire walked out into the spring sunlight with her son, her lawyer, and her best friend. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The whole world wanted a piece of her story. She gave them nothing. She had already given enough. In the car on the way home, Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question Claire had been dreading. Mom, is Dad going to be okay in prison? Claire considered lying, considered softening the truth, considered protecting him from reality. Then she remembered that lies were what had destroyed their family in the first place. I hope so, sweetheart. she said honestly. Prison is hard, but your dad made choices, and choices have consequences. Maybe this will help him become a better person. Maybe it won't. We can't control that. We can only control how we live our own lives. Noah thought about this. Can I still love him even if he did bad things? Of course you can. Loving someone doesn't mean you approve of everything they do. It just means you care about them as a person, even when they make mistakes. Do you still love him? Claire was silent for a moment. Then she answered with the same honesty she had promised herself she would always give her son. I loved who I thought he was, the real Marcus, the one who hurt us. I don't know if I ever really knew him, but I don't hate him. Hating someone takes a lot of energy. I'd rather spend that energy on healing, on building a good life for us, on being happy. Noah nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. Mom, I'm proud of you. Claire pulled him close and kissed the top of his head, tears streaming down her face. I'm proud of you too, baby. I'm so proud of you too. 6 months later, Claire stood in the kitchen of their new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of Hartford. It was nothing like the Connecticut mansion she had lived in with Marcus. It was smaller, simpler, with creaky floors and a backyard that needed work. It was perfect. She had started working again at a pediatric clinic 20 minutes away. The nursing license had been harder to reinstate than she expected, requiring months of continuing education and supervised practice. But she had done it. She had rebuilt a career that Marcus had convinced her she no longer needed. Noah was thriving in his new school, making friends, getting good grades, slowly becoming the happy child he had been before everything fell apart. He still asked about his father sometimes, still wrote letters that Claire helped him mail to the prison. But the trauma was fading, replaced day by day with new memories, better memories. Rachel came over most Saturdays, bringing wine and gossip and the kind of laughter that had been missing from Claire's life for too long. Catherine Pierce had become more than a lawyer. She had become a friend, someone who understood the specific kind of strength it took to survive what Claire had survived. Even Margaret Dawson had become part of their lives. She visited Noah regularly, careful never to badmouth her son, but equally careful to make sure Noah understood that what his father had done was wrong. She was, in her own way, trying to break the cycle that had claimed her husband and her son. On this particular Saturday evening, Claire was making dinner when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello? The voice on the other end made her freeze. Claire Dawson? This is Detective Martinez. I need you to come to the station. Claire's heart dropped. Is it Marcus? Did something happen? A pause. No, it's not about Marcus. It's about your father. Claire frowned. My father died when I was 12. A longer pause. Mrs. Dawson, that's what we need to talk about. The police station felt different this time. Claire was not a suspect anymore. She was not in handcuffs. She was sitting across from Detective Martinez in a comfortable office, holding a cup of coffee that she had not touched. What's going on? Claire asked. Why are you asking about my father? Detective Martinez opened a folder and slid a photograph across the desk. During the investigation into Marcus's finances, we discovered some unusual connections. Shell companies linked to shell companies. One of those companies was registered in the Cayman Islands under the name of a man named Thomas Reynolds. Claire shook her head. I don't know anyone named Thomas Reynolds. Detective Martinez slid another photograph across the desk. This one was older, faded, showing a man in his 30s with dark hair and familiar eyes. Claire's breath caught. Where did you get this? It was in Marcus's files. He was using it as leverage against someone. We're not sure who yet, but we ran the image through facial recognition and got a hit. Thomas Reynolds, currently living in Miami, age 64. Detective Martinez met Claire's eyes. Mrs. Dawson, Thomas Reynolds is your father, your biological father. He didn't die when you were 12. He disappeared. Claire stared at the photograph. The man's eyes were her eyes. The shape of his face was her face. 20-plus years of grief, of missed birthdays, of growing up without a father, all of it collapsed into this single moment of impossible revelation. I don't understand, she whispered. Neither do we, yet, but we're looking into it. And if your father is still alive, If Marcus knew about it and was using it somehow, there may be more to this story than any of us realized. Claire picked up the photograph with trembling hands. The man in the picture smiled back at her, frozen in a moment 3 decades gone, holding secrets she had never known existed. Her marriage had been a lie. Her father's death had been a lie. How much of her life had been built on foundations that never existed? But even as the questions multiplied, Claire felt something unexpected. Not despair, not anger, curiosity, hope, the possibility of answers to questions she had stopped asking long ago. She looked up at Detective Martinez. What happens now? Now we investigate. It will take time, months, maybe longer, and there's no guarantee we'll find the truth. Claire nodded slowly. Then she stood, tucking the photograph carefully into her purse. I've waited this long, she said. I can wait a little longer. She walked out of this police station into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Somewhere across the country, a man who might be her father was living a life she knew nothing about. Somewhere in prison, a man who had destroyed her family was serving time for his crimes. And here, in this moment, Claire Dawson stood at the beginning of a new chapter, not the ending she had expected, not the ending anyone had expected, but an ending that was also a beginning. Her phone buzzed, a text from Noah. Mom, when are you coming home? Rachel brought pizza, and she says she won't let me have any until you get here because she, quote, believes in family dinners, unquote. Claire laughed, the sound surprising her. She typed back quickly, on my way, save me 2 slices. She got in her car and drove toward home, toward her son, toward the life she had fought so hard to build. The questions about her father would wait. The mysteries would wait. The answers, when they came, would come. For now, there was pizza, there was family, there was the simple, extraordinary joy of being alive and free and loved. For the first time and longer than she could remember, Claire Dawson was genuinely happy. Not the manufactured happiness of pretending everything was fine. Not the desperate happiness of convincing herself that things would get better. Real happiness. Earned happiness. The kind that came from surviving the worst and discovering that you were stronger than you ever knew. She pulled into the driveway of her new house. Through the window, she could see Noah and Rachel laughing about something. The light inside was warm and golden and welcoming. Claire turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet car. Thank you, she whispered to no one in particular. For all of it, even the parts that broke me, because they also made me who I am. Then she got out of the car and walked toward the light, toward her son, toward whatever came next. The story was not over. Stories never really were. But this chapter, the chapter of survival and strength and unexpected alliances, had reached its end. And it was a good ending, a hopeful ending, the kind of ending that made all the pain worth it. Claire opened the door and stepped inside. Mom, Noah shouted, running toward her with a slice of pizza already in his hand. You're home. I'm home, Claire said, pulling him into a hug. I'm finally home. And she meant it in every possible way. So there you have it, my friends. Claire's story, a woman who was told she was crazy until she almost believed it. A mother who lost everything and found something stronger inside herself. A survivor who learned that the fire meant to destroy her only revealed who she truly was. If her story moved you, even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which moment hit you the hardest? Have you ever known someone like Marcus? Or maybe, like Claire, you're fighting your own invisible battle right now. Drop a like if this story touched your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss another story. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You matter more than you know. And Temo.